Hey, welcome back to Vortex Garage, and once again we're out here working on our 2001 Ford F250 Super Duty. Now, this thing is a pretty cool truck. It's got a V10, it's a single cab, work truck spec, it's got vinyl floors, vinyl seats, 4-wheel drive, 8-foot bed. This thing's really just made for working, getting the job done, hauling whatever you need to haul. It's the TCB of trucks, taking care of business. It's kind of what it is, no fluff. Well, as you can tell, our bed is off the truck here, and we're going to tell you a little bit about why we did that and what we're doing today. But first, a little bit of backstory on this truck, if you haven't already caught up with us. This truck came to us, it was running on 7 to 10 cylinders, had been attacked by squirrels. Okay, so squirrels ate wiring for 3 of the cylinders. It was either the fuel injectors on some, ignition coils on others, or both. There was another piece of the engine harness they had eaten through, so I had to do a lot of wiring repair under the hood. Had a blown power steering line that had to be repaired. And then after we took care of that, got it running really good, had a bad exhaust leak out of the driver's side, common issue with the exhaust studs breaking, had to fix that. The other side had apparently already been done. So took care of the driver's side. Now it's running good. Exhaust sounds great, making some progress. So then that brings us into some things that you saw here on Vortex Garage. We had a big problem with water getting into the cab. Turns out, another common problem, our windshield seal was bad. So we went ahead and pulled the windshield out, cleaned up the window frame, found a bunch of rust on it, fixed all that, got a new windshield installed, sealed up properly, cleaned out the interior fully, got it nice and looking good in there. It's nice and dry now. So we got a dry truck, we got a good running truck, and that takes us to the back half. So when this truck came to us, it was basically only had 5 of 8 bed bolts installed. You could literally pick up one corner of the bed and move it around. So we knew we had to address that and take care of it. Now, why would it only have 5 of 8 in it? Well, that kind of goes into the style of how these beds are installed. So if you think about it, in any new car, and even cars of this vintage, anything the automaker can do to save time during assembly or reduce errors in assembly, they do because they save money in the long run. Even if it's 5 cents or $1. Well, let's even say 5 cents. If they can save 5 cents on something simple, if they're building 250,000 a year, you multiply that 5 cents by 250,000, all of a sudden, you got a pretty decent chunk of change that you're saving. So there's a big incentive for them to make it more efficient on the assembly line. Well, that often translates into things being more of a pain in the ass when you're maintaining or repairing it. That's exactly the case with the bed bolts here. So the original bed bolts that Ford used were Torx Plus T50s, and they use a captive nut. And it actually kind of does like self-drilling, like self-tapping sort of thing when they put it in. That's great in assembly because you don't need 2 people to install it. And the person putting the bolts in, they don't have to worry about cross-threading anything. Because imagine that, if you cross-thread it, now you got to stop production, take care of the captive nut, put a new one on, and start over again. So these kind of self-drilling bed bolts, it's a one-person operation. It really speeds up putting things together. Well, 10, 15 years later, when you go to remove the bed for whatever reason, those bolts are rusted, the heads are mangled, or they get mangled when you remove them. A lot of people end up cutting them off, and I actually helped on this one, gosh, it was probably about 10 years ago. And I want to say we cut the heads off of at least half of them that did not want to come out. And the idea was, okay, well, let's pull them and we'll just put grade 8 nut and bolt hardware in. And so what? 2-person job to install. Someone lays underneath and holds the nut, or you could weld the nut to the frame and someone's up top and zings it in. Well, you're going to find a problem if you do that, right? So all of the bed bolts are easy to get to underneath with a wrench, except where the fuel tank is. And that one right up here, there's no way to really get a wrench in there because you've got a cross member here, you've got the bed laying on top. So the only thing you could really do is, I guess you could try to weld in the bottom there, but that's where your fuel tank is. Now, I remember 10 years ago, we pulled this bed to replace the fuel pump because we figured it'd be easier than dropping it of course had a full tank when it failed, then siphoning it out and lowering the tank and all that and dealing with the wiring and the hoses. Just pull the bed. It's 8 bolts and a couple wiring harnesses and the fuel filler. Nice and easy. Well, it was tough with those stinking Torx bolts that they use from the factory. So at any rate, it ended up with realizing, hey, it's really difficult to get that nut and bolt in that side right there. Now, I understand the bed was pulled later on for another reason. I wasn't a part of that, and it was just sort of temporarily reattached. It only had 5 bolts put in it, and it came over here that way. So I knew that I wanted to pull that off and basically take the time to clean everything up under here and get some OEM style bed bolts and put the bed back on with those. And that's what we're going to do today. Now, of course, we found more issues when we did that. We pulled the bed and we found very common problem, another common issue you find. Granted, this is almost a 20-year-old truck at this point. The bed rails were really rusted. So we got a new set of bed rails that we're going to have to cut the old ones off the old bed, at least the ones that didn't fall off already. Clean up the bottom of the bed. Luckily, the bed floor looks solid, and then we'll go ahead and weld the new bed supports on before we reinstall it. But while we have this off, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and grind the frame down, just wire brush it, put some rust encapsulator on it, just clean it up really nice, and then we're going to do anything that makes sense to do when we have the access. So our shocks are rusted. We're going to put new shocks on, like super easy to get to these. I mean, they're not hard to get with the bed on, but it's silly not to do them right now. They're so accessible. We're going to replace the rear brake line, which was done many years ago and doesn't look all that great. So we're going to put a nice custom bent one of those in. We're going to look at any rubber hoses. Some of our vent lines are real dry rotted here. We're going to take care of those. We're going to go ahead and put a new filler hose and filler neck. The filler neck's kind of rusted, so we went ahead and picked one of those up, cheap parts. Our heat shield here for the muffler's got a rust hole in it, but otherwise is pretty solid, so we're going to reinforce that and clean it up. What else we got? Oh, the fuel pump. Yeah, this is what I originally helped on probably 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago at this point, honestly. It's probably more like 12 years. If I recall, I think we just put like an Airtex Wells aftermarket pump in. And I went ahead and said, you know, pulling all this stuff apart, I'm going to go ahead and put an OEM Motorcraft pump in there. That way we've got the insurance of having a nice new fuel pump, not an old kind of aftermarket one that is of questionable. You know, I just don't know. It's old. They've been sitting. So we'll put a nice new OEM style one. And basically just go over and clean everything up, make it look nice, refurb it. So that's what we're going to do today. And then we'll get to the bed and clean the bed up and get it ready for reinstallation. But really what you're going to see today is a lot of grinding on the frame with a wire brush. So not really grinding, just wire brushing it, getting the scale off. Then we'll be cleaning that up, painting it, and then going ahead and replacing some parts. And we'll bring you along for the ride there. Eventually we'll catch up and we'll do the bed. I don't think it'll be on this video, maybe the next one. And I probably won't talk as much on that one because you'll be fully up to speed on where we are with this truck. All right, enough talking, let's get to it. In reality, I meant we're going to talk for 7 minutes, but you'd be surprised how much I cut out. Anyway, I wish we had taken video of getting the bed off the frame of the truck, but we only have some pictures. We used our 2-post lift and a couple supports, and it went nice and smooth. We just got it lifted straight up, and then we put it on a wooden table that we actually used to hold our Spitfire body on. Well, once we got it up, you could see just how rusty those supports were. In fact, one of them was still stuck to the frame when we lifted it off, even though it wasn't bolted on. So we had our work cut out for us, definitely. But before we do anything else here, what we decided to do, like we said, was go ahead, bust out the tools, and start grinding on the frame. We'll probably have to do a voiceover. And what would that voiceover even be? Well, probably to tell you this is going to be a major scope creep type project. There's going to be a lot of videos to catch up on all the stuff that we did. In the meantime, here we are grinding the frame. In case you're wondering why you need to wear eye and also particulate air protection, I don't know if you can see the cloud of rust dust just hanging in the air here. We're actually going to open the shop doors even though it's cold out just to get some ventilation. It's already starting to clear. In the meantime, here's what we've been doing. And we're not going to film too much of this because it's probably pretty boring. But basically we're using various wire wheels and wire brushes. So that is a wire wheel rated for an angle grinder. You got to be careful that you use one specifically for that. We also have some that are drill mounted that are going to fit into crevices a little easier. And of course we've got some handheld ones as well. So basically we're just coming through knocking the scale off. There's no need to take this down the pure bare metal. All we want to do, since we're putting a rust converting kind of coating on it, is go ahead and get the scale off, get all the loose stuff. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to try to get into every area that we can on the frame, go underneath it, inside the C channel, and basically just get it cleaned up so we can go ahead and coat it. And as you saw, we're going to wear our face mask for eye protection, because here's one of the things that you don't think about, or you do if you've used them, is these things fly off at 8 million miles an hour, and the last thing you want is one of these pieces of the wire wheel lodged in your eye, or a piece of rust scale in your eye. That would suck and require some pretty nasty, well, it would just suck. So it's best to play it safe. Don't get sick or injured while you're doing this kind of work, because it takes the fun out of it. All right, we're gonna press ahead and work on this. We'll catch up with you when we're done. Oh, and I did put a blanket over the fuel tank, just in case there's fuel vapors. I know we're not grinding necessarily, but even with the wire wheel, you get sparks. You got, you know, metal against metal. So we don't want to have an errant spark go where there's fuel vapor. So we're just going to cover that with our welding blanket for now. Once we were done grinding the frame down, we went ahead and started applying some of our rust encapsulator. It's pretty simple. All you got to do is brush it on, and I recommend using some cheap chip brushes from something like Harbor Freight, because, well, it looks fine, and you get to throw those away when you're done and not to clean them. All right, so we've got our first coat of frame paint on. We used our Eastwood Rust Encapsulator Platinum. I had a can that was left over from some of the Spitfire work, and it had quite a bit in it, and fortunately we needed the entire, about 3/4 of a can that I had was enough to coat the frame at least once. And that stuff's a little bit thicker than some of the other paint, so it kind of goes on nice and thick, gives it a nice protective coat, and it looks pretty good too. Of course, you can see there's some runs in the paint. We're not doing this for beauty. We're doing this really to cover it. So, you know, if we were trying to make this thing look really good, well, A, we probably would have done more than just grind it with that wire wheel. And we wouldn't put it on with a brush and just sort of globbed it on. The whole point of globbing it on, obviously not too messy, but, you know, we really wanted to get down into some of the areas that we couldn't necessarily fit a brush. What we're going to do is follow up with a spray can and go ahead and spray some of the other areas that we can't get into. And then we have another can of the Rust Encapsulator Plus, which is black in color. And we're probably going to do a second coat over this for most areas. Of course, you can also see I did the top of the leaf spring. We didn't do the entire leaf spring. We haven't done the axle. Obviously, we're not going to paint the exhaust. I did this top of the heat shield, but I have not done this section of the heat shield. I actually ground that down. We'll grind it down a little more. We'll probably put a patch panel on there eventually. And well, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're just going to kind of keep at it and grab camera when we can and show you what we got going on. Once that was complete, we went ahead and moved on to replacing our fuel pump. And of course, we had the tunes going in the shop, so we got to do a little bit of voiceover here. So the two fuel hoses that go into the fuel hat are pretty easy to take off, just some clips to get them out of the way, and then you just use a fuel release tool. So this line tool goes in and it kind of releases a little spring. What you do is you push that tool in, and then you also have to push the hose in at the same time, and you'll kind of feel a click as it releases, and then you pull it off of the line. Pretty simple once you give it a try. Now getting the actual fuel hat off, it just screws on with a plastic cap, and you do have to be cautious and careful. There is an O-ring under there, a seal basically to kind of keep an eye on. But it's not like some of them where they use a metal plate that you have to use a brass punch to turn them off. I was able to just, with a pair of gloves, get it unscrewed. Nice and easy. You'll be able to lift the cap off, and then you'll see the actual fuel pump module and basket inside. And it's actually retained into the bottom of the tank, so which is probably good so it doesn't roll around in there, but it's annoying because you got to stick your hand in there, and if you've got a full tank of gas, you got to reach all the way in there and grab it. You kind of got to twist to unlock it, and then you can pull it out and drain it. As the old Haynes manuals like to say, reassembly is reverse of removal. So you just take your new one. Since we bought the whole module and assembly, it's pretty simple. Just put the whole thing in, lock it in place, and then go ahead and get the top reassembled. Now if you're actually just replacing the pump itself, which is what we did last time, and we never took video, it was like 10-15 years ago, you have to take apart the actual basket, take the hoses off, and replace the actual pump. So it's certainly quicker to just do the whole assembly. And of course, the typical things come into play here. No open flames, sparks, anything. You're working with fuel, and what's worse than fuel is fuel vapors. So be very careful when you're working around those. Oh, and those fuel hoses, they just push and clip back in. So very simple to put back together. So showing you every little bit of painting the frame would be kind of boring. So instead, we're just going to show you some pictures of how it turned out as we added layers to it. And quite honestly, it came out really good. You can probably spot there we put a new pair of shocks in the back and also a new set in the front. And well, as we were going, we had a little bit of a mishap. The rear brake line blew as we were moving the truck around. So we knew we had to take care of those brake lines anyway. Well, what we're going to do with this whole series is try to show you shorter videos of some of the work that we did. So next video, we're going to tackle the brake system. We took the wheels off. We decided, hey, let's put all new brakes on this thing, new calipers, new rotors, new pads, and let's go ahead and replace pretty much every brake line on the truck because they all look pretty nasty. So that's what we're going to show you next time on our video here. A little bit of a preview. Take again look at what we had snapped there. And that axle vent tube, that's going to be a fun one to get off. We'll show you how to get those off because those like to weld themselves to that brake line back there. Oh, and then there's this. And of course these. All this will be coming on the next video here on Vortex Garage.